The cafe clerk was wearing his wife's ring. Then he learned the truth. The cafe was bustling with life, the hum of conversations blending with the clinking of cups and plates. I had no reason to be there. I rarely stepped out of my office or my mansion unless it was strictly necessary. Yet, something had drawn me to this small town, to this unassuming place on the edge of nowhere. As I sipped my coffee, my eyes wandered across the room, landing on a young woman behind the counter. Her presence was understated. Dark hair pulled back neatly, her hands moving gracefully as she worked. But what caught my attention wasn't her demeanor. It was the delicate silver ring on her finger, glinting under the soft cafe lights. My breath hitched. It couldn't be. That ring was unique, crafted specifically for my wife decades ago. It had been a symbol of our love, and when she passed, I thought I'd lost it forever. How could this young woman, a stranger, have it? My mind raced with questions, but I couldn't bring myself to interrupt her work. Instead, I waited, watching, my heart pounding with a mix of hope and dread. When the cafe quieted, I approached the counter, gripping my coffee cup as if it were the only thing grounding me. "Excuse me," I said, my voice softer than I intended. The young woman looked up, her eyes meeting mine. There was something in her gaze, familiar, yet distant. "Yes?" she asked, polite but cautious. "That ring on your hand," I said, motioning toward it. "Where did you get it?" She looked at her hand, her expression shifting slightly. "Oh, this?" she replied, her tone light. "It was a gift from my mom. She said it belonged to someone very special." I swallowed hard. "Do you know where she got it?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "No, my mom passed away when I was younger. She didn't talk much about it." The words hit me like a blow. Could this young woman be connected to my past? Could she be? I shook the thought away. It was too soon to jump to conclusions. But the resemblance was there, subtle but undeniable. The way her eyes crinkled slightly when she spoke, the curve of her jaw. Things I hadn't thought about in years were now vividly clear. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "Would you mind telling me your name?" She hesitated again, as if measuring my intentions. "Emma," she said finally. "Emma Reyes." I nodded, repeating the name in my mind, letting it sink in. "I'm Harold," I said. "It's a pleasure to meet you." She gave me a small smile, polite but guarded. "Likewise." The conversation didn't last much longer. She had customers to attend to, and I didn't want to push too hard. But as I walked out of that cafe, my chest felt tight. The questions swirled in my mind, each one louder than the last. Was it possible that Emma was connected to my wife, to my daughter? Was she my daughter? I needed answers, and there was only one way to get them. I'd have to dig into her past, trace the threads of her life back to their source. It wasn't just curiosity. It was a desperate, aching need to know if fate had finally led me to what I'd lost so many years ago. As I stepped into the cool evening air, the world seemed to blur around me. This wasn't just coincidence. It couldn't be. That ring, that name, her face, it all meant something. And for the first time in years, I felt a spark of something I thought I'd buried long ago. Hope. The cool evening air did little to steady my racing thoughts. The ring, her name, her face, it all stirred something deep within me, a mixture of hope and fear I hadn't felt in decades. As I walked away from the cafe, the image of Emma lingered in my mind. The way she had smiled, polite but cautious, as if she carried the weight of secrets even she didn't understand. I returned to my car, sitting in the driver's seat with the engine off. My hands trembled against the steering wheel as my mind churned. Could she really be my daughter? My heart screamed yes, but logic whispered caution. There was only one way to know for sure, and I couldn't afford to let this slip through my fingers. If Emma was the thread that tied me back to my wife and the child we'd lost, then I had to follow it, no matter where it led. The first step was clear. I needed information. Emma had said her mother passed away, but she hadn't mentioned a father. That left a gap, a mystery I had to solve. I pulled out my phone, my fingers hovering over the screen before dialing the number of an old friend, James. If anyone could help me, it was him. He had a knack for finding answers in places no one else would think to look. "Harold," James said when he picked up, his voice warm but curious. "It's been a while." "It has," I admitted, my tone heavier than I intended. "I need your help." James didn't hesitate. "Anything? What's going on?" I hesitated, the weight of my request sinking in. I think I might have found my daughter." There was silence on the other end, and for a moment, I wondered if I'd imagined his voice. Then he spoke, his tone measured. "Are you sure?" "No," I said honestly, "but I have a lead. Her name is Emma Reyes, and there's something about her. Something familiar. She has a ring, one I gave to my wife years ago. I need to know who she is, where she comes from." James let out a low whistle. "That's a lot to unpack. Where do you want me to start?" "Her mother," I said. "She mentioned her mother gave her the ring before she passed. I need to know who she was, where they lived, anything that could tie her to me." "I'll see what I can find," James promised. "But Harold, if this is what you think it is, you need to be careful. Don't let hope cloud your judgment." "I know," I replied, though my heart betrayed me. How could I not hope? After all these years, it felt like the universe was finally giving me a second chance. I ended the call, sitting in silence as the weight of the situation settled over me. The cafe was still within view, its lights glowing warmly against the night. For a moment, I considered going back, but I stopped myself. I needed to be patient, to let James do his work. Pushing too hard could drive Emma away, and I couldn't risk that. Instead, I drove back to the small inn where I was staying. The room was modest, with a bed that creaked and a lamp that flickered when I turned it on. It wasn't much, but it was all I needed for now. I sat at the desk, pulling out the photograph of my wife I always carried with me. Her eyes seemed to hold 1,000 unspoken words, her smile a reminder of what I'd lost. "Maria," I whispered, my voice breaking. Could it really be her? Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling as memories flooded back. The way Maria used to laugh, the warmth of her hand in mine, the day we brought our daughter home. It was a life I thought I'd never touch again, and now it felt just out of reach. The next morning, I received a call from James. "Harold," he said, his voice grave. "I found something." My heart pounded. "What is it?" "I looked into Emma Reyes," he began. "Her mother's name was Cecilia Reyes. She passed away about 10 years ago in a car accident. There's no mention of a father on any official records, but there's one thing that stood out, her birth certificate." "What about it?" I asked, gripping the phone tightly. "There's no father listed," James said, "but the date and place of birth matched the time Maria would have been pregnant." "Harold, it's possible." Possible. The word sent a jolt through me. I stood, pacing the small room as my thoughts raced. If Emma was my daughter, why had Maria hidden her? What had driven her to leave, to sever all ties? "Thank you, James," I said, my voice trembling. "I owe you more than I can say." "Just be careful," he replied. "This is delicate. Don't rush it." After the call ended, I knew what I had to do. I had to talk to Emma again, to learn more about her life and see if the pieces fit. The thought terrified me, but it also gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. That afternoon, I returned to the cafe. Emma was there, her dark hair pulled back as she moved gracefully between tables. She smiled at customers, her laughter soft but genuine. Watching her, I felt a pang of longing, a yearning for the time I'd lost, for the chance to know her. When she noticed me, her smile faltered, replaced by a look of curiosity. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. "Emma," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "Can we talk?" She hesitated, glancing around as if weighing her options. Finally, she nodded. "Sure, let me finish up here." As I waited, I felt the weight of years pressing down on me. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for. And as she sat down across from me, her eyes meeting mine, I knew there was no turning back. As I sat across from Emma in the quiet corner of the cafe, my heart felt like it was on the verge of bursting. She looked at me with a mix of curiosity and caution, her hands resting lightly on the edge of the table. I had prepared a dozen ways to start this conversation, but now that I was here, words seemed to escape me. "So, what did you want to talk about?" she asked, breaking the silence. I cleared my throat, searching for the right words. "I wanted to ask you more about your mother," I said carefully. "You mentioned she gave you that ring. It caught my attention because it's very unique." Emma tilted her head slightly, studying me. "Yeah, I guess it is. She always said it was a special piece, but she didn't talk much about where it came from. Why does it matter?" Her directness caught me off guard. I took a deep breath, deciding honesty was the only way forward. "It matters because I recognize it," I said. "I had a ring just like that made for someone very important to me a long time ago." Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't say anything. The cafe noise seemed to fade into the background as we locked eyes, the moment heavy with unspoken questions. "Who was it for?" she finally asked, her voice softer now. "For my wife," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Her name was Maria. She passed away many years ago." Emma's brow furrowed, and for a moment, I saw something flicker in her expression. Recognition, perhaps, or maybe just the weight of what I was implying. "That's a coincidence," she said slowly, "but my mom's name was Cecilia. She wasn't Maria." "I know it sounds strange," I admitted, "but I have reasons to believe there might be a connection." "I don't want to intrude, Emma, but I need to understand." She leaned back slightly, crossing her arms. "Why are you so interested in my life?" she asked, her tone cautious but not unkind. "I mean, we don't even know each other." I hesitated. How could I explain the ache in my heart, the years of searching and longing? "Because I've been looking for answers for a very long time," I said. "And meeting you, seeing that ring, it feels like a piece of a puzzle I thought I'd never solve." Emma studied me, her gaze searching for sincerity. "You think I'm part of that puzzle?" she asked. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I want to find out." She looked down at the ring on her finger, turning it absently as if it held secrets she'd never considered. "I don't know much about my mom's past," she said after a moment. "She was private. We moved around a lot when I was a kid. She didn't talk about her life before I was born. Do you have anything of hers?" I asked gently. "Letters, photos, anything that might tell us more?" Emma hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I have a box of her things at home," she said, "but I haven't looked through it in years. It's mostly just old papers and keepsakes. Would you let me see it?" I asked, my voice careful, almost pleading. I know it's a lot to ask, but it could help us both. Emma's eyes searched mine again, and I could see the internal battle she was waging. Trust was not something she gave easily. I could sense that much. But there was also a spark of curiosity, a desire to understand the connection I was so desperate to uncover. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll bring it tomorrow." Relief washed over me, but I kept my composure. "Thank you," I said sincerely. "You have no idea how much this means to me." She nodded, still guarded. "Don't get your hopes up," she said. "It's probably just a coincidence." "Maybe," I replied. "But even coincidences can lead to something meaningful." The next day, I arrived at the cafe early, unable to shake the anticipation coursing through me. When Emma walked in carrying a small wooden box, I felt my breath catch. She set it down on the table between us, her expression a mixture of curiosity and trepidation. "This is everything I have," she said. "If there's something here that answers your questions, I'd like to know too." I nodded, my hands trembling slightly as I opened the box. Inside were neatly folded letters, faded photographs, and a few small trinkets. Each item seemed to carry a story, a fragment of a life I was desperate to piece together. I picked up a photograph, my heart pounding as I recognized the face of the woman standing beside a younger Emma. It was Maria, or at least it looked like her. Her hair was different, shorter, and she wore glasses I didn't remember, but the resemblance was undeniable. "Emma," I said, my voice trembling. This is Maria, my wife." Emma's eyes widened, and she leaned closer, studying the photo. "That's my mom," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you sure?" "I'm certain," I said, my throat tightening. She must have changed her name, started a new life, but why? Emma asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. Why would she leave everything behind? Why wouldn't she tell me? I shook my head, my mind reeling. I don't know, I admitted, but we're going to find out. As we continued to sift through the contents of the box, more pieces of the puzzle began to emerge. Letters written in Maria's handwriting, a pendant I had given her long ago, and finally, a birth certificate. My heart nearly stopped when I saw the name listed under father. It was mine. Emma, I said, my voice breaking. You're my daughter. The moment the words left my mouth, I felt the air between us grow heavy. Emma stared at me, her face frozen in a mixture of shock and disbelief. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but no words came out. Her fingers, which had been lightly resting on the edge of the table, clenched into fists. "What did you just say?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're my daughter," I repeated, my voice trembling. I had no idea until now. "Emma, I swear to you, I didn't know." Her expression hardened, and she leaned back in her chair, shaking her head slowly. "This has to be some kind of mistake," she said, her tone edged with anger. "My mom never mentioned you. Not once. She told me my father left us before I was even born." Her words cut through me like a blade. Maria had told her I left? Why? I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing thoughts. "Emma, I need you to believe me," I said, leaning forward slightly. "I didn't leave. Your mother and I, we were happy. At least, I thought we were. Then one day, she was gone. No explanation, no note, just gone. I looked for her everywhere. For years." Emma's jaw tightened, and I could see the conflict in her eyes. She wanted to dismiss me, to cling to the version of her mother she had always known. But the evidence was sitting right in front of her. Photos, letters, the birth certificate. Still, I knew that logic wouldn't be enough to bridge the years of pain and confusion. "How can I trust you?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. "How do I know you're not just some lonely man looking for a connection?" I felt the sting of her words but forced myself to remain calm. "I understand why you're skeptical," I said, "and I can't blame you for feeling that way. But the truth is right here, Emma. That ring, the letters, your mother's handwriting, these aren't coincidences. I don't want anything from you except the chance to know you." She looked down at her hands, her shoulders tense. "This is too much," she muttered, almost to herself. "It's all happening too fast." "I know," I said gently, "and I don't expect you to accept this overnight. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. Take your time, Emma. I'll wait as long as you need." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she picked up one of the photos from the box, a picture of Maria and me on our wedding day. I could see the confusion and sadness in her eyes as she studied the image. "She looks so different," Emma said softly. "You're saying this is my mom, but it's like looking at a stranger." "That's how I felt when I saw her picture in the box," I admitted. "It's been so many years, Emma. Life changes us, and sometimes it hides the parts of ourselves we thought we'd never lose. But that's still her. That's still Maria." She set the photo down and exhaled shakily. "I don't know what to believe anymore." "You don't have to decide right now," I said. "But if you're willing, I'd like to tell you everything I remember about her, about us. Maybe it will help you piece things together." Emma hesitated, her gaze flickering between me and the box of memories. Finally, she nodded, though her posture remained guarded. "Fine," she said. "Tell me." I took a deep breath, letting my mind travel back to the days when Maria and I had been young and in love. "I met your mother when I was in college," I began. "She worked at the library, shelving books and helping students find what they needed. The first time I saw her, I thought she was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. She had this way of smiling that could light up the entire room." Emma's expression softened slightly, though her arms stayed crossed. "She was always smiling," she murmured. "At least, that's how I remember her." I smiled faintly, grateful for the small connection. "She was full of life," I continued. "We started dating not long after we met, and before I knew it, I couldn't imagine my life without her. We got married in a small ceremony, just the two of us and a few close friends. I gave her that ring on our wedding day." Emma glanced down at the ring on her finger, her lips pressing into a thin line. "And then she left you?" she asked, her tone still skeptical. I nodded, the memory of that day as painful as if it had happened yesterday. "I came home one evening, and she was gone," I said. "No note, no warning, just gone. I searched everywhere, Emma. I hired private investigators, followed every lead I could find, but it was like she had vanished into thin air. Losing her was the hardest thing I've ever experienced. And now, finding you. It feels like a second chance I never thought I'd get." Emma's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she quickly blinked them away. "If what you're saying is true, then why didn't she tell me about you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why would she keep me in the dark?" "I wish I knew," I said honestly, "but I think the only way to find out is to keep searching for answers together." For a long moment, Emma didn't say anything. Then she stood up abruptly, grabbing the box and clutching it to her chest. "I need time to think," she said, her tone firm. "This is a lot to process." "I understand," I said, rising to my feet as well. "Take all the time you need. I'm here if you want to talk." She nodded curtly, then turned and walked out of the cafe without another word. I watched her go, my heart aching with a mix of hope and fear. This was just the beginning, and I knew the road ahead would be difficult. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was moving toward something meaningful. Toward her. The cafe door closed behind her with a soft chime, leaving me standing in the middle of the room, staring at the space where she had been. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Guilt for the pain I had unintentionally caused, hope that she might give me a chance, and a gnawing sense of dread that I'd lose her again before I even had the chance to know her. I couldn't stay there. The walls of the cafe felt like they were closing in, and the hum of conversation that had once seemed lively now grated against my ears. Grabbing my coat, I walked out into the cool evening air. The street was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights, and for a moment, I just stood there, trying to figure out my next step. Emma was my daughter. I had no doubt anymore. But her confusion, her resistance, it was understandable. I had burst into her life like a storm, appending everything she thought she knew. I needed to tread carefully, to give her space while also showing her that I wasn't going to disappear. I walked aimlessly through the small town, my thoughts churning. Every step brought back memories of Maria, her laughter, her warmth, the way she used to hum quietly as she worked on her art. The years hadn't dulled the sharp edges of her absence, and now, Emma was a living reminder of what I had lost, and what I still stood to lose. I found myself at the edge of a small park. The benches were empty, save for a man reading under the dim light of a lamp. I sat down on a nearby bench, staring at the fountain in the center. The sound of water trickling over stone was calming, a quiet counterpoint to the storm inside me. The sound of footsteps approached, pulling me out of my thoughts. I glanced up to see a man, perhaps in his late 40s, wearing a crisp suit and carrying a briefcase. His expression was unreadable as he stopped in front of me. "Mr. Palmer?" he asked, his voice calm but direct. I tensed. It had been years since anyone outside my business dealings had addressed me so formally. "Yes," I replied cautiously. "Who's asking?" He extended a hand. "My name is Richard Owens. I believe I have information you've been looking for." My pulse quickened, and I stood to face him. "Information about what?" "About Maria," he said, his tone measured, "and the circumstances surrounding her disappearance." The ground seemed to shift beneath me. After decades of searching, of dead ends and unanswered questions, here was a man claiming to hold the answers I'd been desperate to find. "How do you know Maria?" I asked, my voice steady but sharp. "I was an investigator," he said, his gaze unwavering. "Your case crossed my desk years ago. At the time, I didn't have the resources to dig deeper, but certain things didn't sit right with me. I kept an eye on it, and over the years, I've pieced together parts of the puzzle." I stared at him, my mind racing. "Why come to me now?" I demanded. "Why not years ago?" Richard hesitated, his expression softening slightly. "Because it's taken me this long to get to the truth, and because I recently discovered something that changes everything." My chest tightened. "What did you find?" He opened his briefcase, pulling out a folder thick with documents. I think it's better if you see for yourself, he said, handing it to me. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the folder. Inside were photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes. The first photo stopped me cold. It was Maria, sitting on a bench, holding a small child, Emma. The date stamped in the corner was years after she had disappeared. This can't be, I whispered, my voice barely audible. She was alive? For a time, Richard said carefully. She changed her name, moved to another state. But she didn't leave you by choice, Mr. Palmer. There were pressures. I looked up at him sharply. What pressures? He hesitated, glancing around as if to ensure no one was listening. Maria owed money, he said finally. She was caught up in something she couldn't escape. Leaving you was her way of protecting you. And Emma, the words hit me like a physical blow. All these years, I had thought she had left because she didn't love me. But the truth was far more complicated and infinitely more heartbreaking. Why didn't she come back? I asked, my voice cracking. Why didn't she tell me? Richard sighed. By the time she could have returned, it was too late. The people she was running from wouldn't have stopped looking for her. And then she got sick. My knees buckled, and I sank back onto the bench, clutching the folder to my chest. Sick? I echoed. She passed away a few years after that photo was taken, Richard said gently. But before she died, she made sure Emma would be safe. She placed her with a family she trusted. That's how Emma ended up here. I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. Maria had sacrificed everything to protect us, and I had spent years resenting her for it. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, struggling to keep my composure. Because Emma deserves to know the truth, Richard said. And so do you. But there's more, Mr. Palmer. Maria left something behind. A letter. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope, worn and yellowed with age. My name was written on the front in Maria's familiar handwriting. My hands shook as I took it from him. She wanted you to have this, Richard said. I believe it will answer the questions I can't. I stared at the envelope, my heart pounding. This was it, the closure I had been searching for, the bridge to understanding the woman I had loved and the daughter I had just found. But as much as I wanted to tear it open right then and there, I knew it would take more courage than I felt in that moment. Thank you, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Richard nodded, his expression somber. I'll leave you to it, he said, turning to walk away. If you have more questions, you know where to find me. As he disappeared into the night, I looked down at the envelope in my hands. Maria's words were inside, waiting for me. But so was the weight of everything I had lost, and everything I stood to gain. The envelope trembled in my hands, as if it carried the weight of Maria's spirit and all the unanswered questions I had held onto for years. I sat on the bench for what felt like an eternity, staring at my name scrawled in her familiar handwriting. The ink was slightly faded, but the emotion behind each stroke was palpable. Maria had always poured her heart into her words, and this letter felt like it was her final masterpiece, a message meant to reach me beyond the veil of time and space. I finally mustered the courage to open it. My fingers hesitated on the edge of the paper, but with a deep breath, I slid my thumb beneath the seal, breaking it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, worn and slightly yellowed but intact. Her handwriting danced across the page, elegant and deliberate, each word carefully chosen. My eyes scanned the opening line, and my breath caught in my throat. My dearest Harold, if you're reading this, it means you found Emma. It means my heart can finally rest. The tears came before I could stop them, blurring the ink as I tried to continue reading. I wiped my eyes hastily, unwilling to let anything obscure her words. Her voice echoed in my mind as I read, soft and filled with the same warmth I remembered so vividly. I never wanted to leave you. I never wanted to leave us. The life we built together was everything I had ever dreamed of, but dreams can sometimes turn into nightmares. When those men came looking for me, threatening to harm you and our daughter, I had no choice but to disappear. I thought it was the only way to protect you. I could almost see her sitting at a desk, pen in hand, struggling to put these thoughts into words. Maria had been so brave, stronger than I ever gave her credit for. And now I was finally understanding the depths of her sacrifice. Emma is our light, Harold. She has your resilience and your kindness. I saw it in her even as a little girl. I hope you see it too. She deserves to know where she came from, to know how much she was loved, even when I couldn't be there to show her. My hands shook as I held the letter closer, Maria's words tearing through the years of guilt and regret that had built up inside me. She had loved me truly and deeply, even as she had made the hardest decision of her life. And Emma, our daughter, had been her guiding star through it all. There's so much I wish I could say, but time has stolen the chance for me to tell you in person. Please, Harold, don't let fear or anger keep you from her. Emma needs you now more than ever. She needs to know the truth, just as you do. And no matter what happens, know that I have always loved you. I always will. Forever yours, Maria. The letter fell to my lap as I covered my face with my hands, the weight of her words crashing down like a tidal wave. For so long, I had believed she had abandoned me. I had let bitterness and pain cloud the truth, blind to the possibility that she had left out of love, not indifference. And now, I had a chance to make things right, not just for myself, but for Emma, for us. The sound of footsteps drew my attention. I looked up to see Richard standing a short distance away, his expression unreadable. He must have been watching me, giving me the space to absorb everything. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope, then stood to face him. She loved us, I said, my voice raw with emotion. She never stopped loving us. Richard nodded. I believe that, he said quietly. Maria was one of the most determined women I ever met. She did what she thought was right, even when it cost her everything. I exhaled slowly, the words sinking in. Does Emma know anything about this? I asked. About who I am? About Maria? Richard shook his head. No. Maria wanted her to have a fresh start, free from the dangers that haunted her past. But Emma's smart. I think she's always known there was more to the story. I nodded, staring off into the distance. The park around us was quiet now, the air cool and still. How do I tell her? I murmured. How do I explain everything without overwhelming her? Richard stepped closer, his voice firm but gentle. You tell her the truth, Harold, and you do it with the same love Maria wrote in that letter. Emma deserves to know, and she deserves to hear it from you. I nodded again, though my chest tightened at the thought. Telling Emma meant reopening old wounds, but it also meant healing them, for both of us. I glanced at the letter in my hand, feeling Maria's presence as if she were standing beside me, urging me forward. I'll do it, I said, my voice steady, but on her terms. I've already disrupted her life enough. She deserves to set the pace. Richard's lips curved into a small smile. That's the right approach. Emma's stronger than you think, Harold. She'll surprise you. With that, Richard bid me good night and walked away, leaving me alone in the park with the weight of what lay ahead. I slipped the envelope into my coat pocket, its presence a comforting reminder of Maria's love and guidance. As I made my way back to my hotel, the night felt different, brighter, somehow. For the first time in years, I wasn't running from the past or drowning in regret. I was walking toward something, someone, toward Emma, toward a future that Maria had fought so hard to make possible. Tomorrow, I would see her again, and this time, I would be ready. The cafe was quieter than usual when I returned the next morning. The early hour left the place bathed in a soft glow, sunlight streaming through the large windows and casting long shadows on the wooden floors. Emma stood behind the counter, arranging pastries in the display case, her movements precise and unhurried. She hadn't noticed me yet, and for a moment, I hesitated. The weight of Maria's letter in my pocket was a constant reminder of the truth I carried, a truth that would change both our lives. I had spent the night rehearsing what I would say, but now, standing there, every carefully planned word seemed to vanish. How do you tell someone that their entire life has been shaped by secrets and sacrifices? I stepped forward, and the small bell above the door chimed softly. Emma looked up, her eyes meeting mine. There was a flicker of recognition, followed by a polite smile. "Good morning," she said, her voice light. "Back for more coffee?" I nodded, returning her smile. Yes, and a conversation, if you'll allow it. Her brow furrowed slightly, curiosity and caution mingling in her expression. A conversation? Yes, I said, taking a deep breath. It's about something very important. Something personal. She straightened, setting the tray of pastries aside. All right, give me a moment to finish up here. I watched as she completed her tasks, her movements deliberate but quick. When she finally joined me at a corner table, her hands rested on the edge, fingers lightly drumming against the surface. "What's this about?" she asked, her tone cautious but not unkind. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the envelope, placing it gently on the table between us. Her gaze dropped to it, then back to me, a hint of wariness in her eyes. "This belonged to your mother," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. "It's a letter she wrote to me." Emma's hand hovered over the envelope, but didn't pick it up. "To you? How did you know my mother?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken possibilities. I met her gaze, my chest tightening as I prepared to shatter the fragile normalcy of her life. "She was my wife," I said softly, "and she was your mother. Emma, I'm your father." The words left my lips like a confession, raw and unfiltered. Emma's eyes widened, her hand recoiling as if the envelope had burned her. For a moment, she simply stared at me, her expression a mixture of shock, disbelief, and something else, something I couldn't quite place. "You're my father?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, my throat tight. "Yes, I didn't know until recently. I didn't know you were still here. But the ring and the letter, they led me to you." She leaned back in her chair, her arms crossing defensively over her chest. "This doesn't make any sense. My mother never talked about you. She never said anything about any of this." "I know," I said, my voice filled with regret. "She was protecting you, Emma. There were circumstances, things I didn't understand until I read her letter." Her eyes darted to the envelope again, her curiosity warring with her reluctance. Slowly, almost cautiously, she reached for it, her fingers trembling slightly as she unfolded the paper inside. I watched as she read Maria's words, her expression shifting with each line. The guardedness melted into something softer, pain, confusion, and finally, a glimmer of understanding. When she finished, she set the letter down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw the vulnerability she had been trying so hard to hide. "She wrote this?" she asked, her voice barely audible. I nodded. "She wanted you to know the truth, even if she couldn't tell you herself." Emma's gaze dropped to the table, her fingers tracing the grain of the wood. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "This is a lot." "I understand," I said gently. "Take all the time you need. I don't want to overwhelm you, Emma. I just want to be here for you, however you need me." She looked up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Why now?" she asked. "Why after all these years?" I swallowed hard, the weight of her question settling heavily on my shoulders. "Because I didn't know," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "If I had known, I would have moved heaven and earth to find you, to bring you home." Emma studied me for a long moment, as if trying to gauge the sincerity of my words. Finally, she exhaled, her shoulders slumping slightly. "This doesn't change everything," she said quietly, "but it changes enough." Her words were cautious, but laced with a fragile hope that mirrored my own. I nodded, understanding that this was just the beginning of a journey we would have to navigate together. "Can I tell you about her?" I asked, a tentative smile tugging at my lips. "About your mother?" Emma hesitated, then gave a small nod. "I'd like that." And so, we sat there, the cafe now quiet around us, as I told her about Maria, the woman who had loved us both so fiercely that she had sacrificed everything to keep us safe. I spoke of her laughter, her strength, and the way she had always made even the darkest days feel brighter. Emma listened intently, her eyes never leaving mine, as if she were piecing together fragments of a puzzle she hadn't known was incomplete. By the time we finished, the sun had climbed higher in the sky, casting a warm glow over the room. Emma's expression had softened, and though there was still uncertainty in her gaze, there was also something new: acceptance. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice steady, "for telling me, for finding me." I reached across the table, my hand covering hers. "Thank you for listening, and for giving me a chance to make this right." For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. The road ahead would be long, and there were still wounds to heal, but for now, we had taken the first step, and that was enough. Thank you for watching this emotional journey. Don't forget to click on the card to watch more stories like this one, filled with heartfelt moments and unforgettable twists. I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment with the themes you'd like to see in future stories. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and share your thoughts in the comments below. I truly enjoy reading every single one of them.